Kia ora and welcome to Wahine, a podcast celebrating wahine in business who are carving their own path with intention, courage and vision. This is a space for honest kōrero about building a business that reflects your identity, your values and the legacy you're creating. I'm your host, Sandra Julian, business coach, mentor and wahine Māori. In each episode, I sit down with wahine entrepreneurs and leaders to explore the real stories behind their success, the lived experiences, the cultural connections, and the bold leadership that shape who they are not only in business, but in life. This isn't hustle culture. This is wahine legacy leadership. This episode is a small interlude from our usual guest episodes. And it's the first episode, or the first solo episode that I've done since rebranding to Wahine in mid last year. And it may well be that this is the only solo episode I record this year, but we'll see. Never say never, right? And I didn't want this episode to be a how-to or a teaching a framework or actually teaching anything. I wanted this episode to be more of a reflection. And if you are listening to the podcast for the first time, welcome along. I wanted to perhaps start by giving you a little bit of context. For those that have listened to the podcast for some time, you'll know my background. I've spent over 2 decades building and leading a service-based business before stepping into what I'm calling the next chapter of my work. And if you're on my email list, you would have been receiving my Momentum Shift newsletters. So you'll know that I'm in this transition phase at the moment. I'm no longer the person that I was, but I'm also still becoming, still finding my way forward. So I wanted this episode to be a bit of a reflection. Not just reminiscing or taking a trip down memory lane, but something that's actually helpful to you. Something that offers insight as you're growing and leading your own business. For the last 6 months or so, I've been sitting with this idea of writing a book. Well, not really a book, but definitely not an advice book. I'm not sure yet what form it will take or what the end product will look like, but it's something that's more like lessons, shifts, perhaps reflections from 25 years running a service-based business. And in this transition phase that I'm currently in, it feels like the right time. It feels like I've got a lot of reflecting to do, and there's a lot to come from it. So as I've been thinking about this reflection phase and potentially what are the shifts I've learned or what are the shifts I've made in the last 25 years in business, I've realized that I don't want to tell people what to do. I just want to offer perspective, a bit of hindsight and a bit of lived experience. I'm right in the beginning of this extraction process, getting things out of my head and onto paper. And it felt right to say some of it out loud right now. Not a lesson that you should take on, but a shift that I've noticed along my way in my journey. Before we go any further, you don't need to take any notes. You just need to listen and notice what comes up for you. Notice what lands. Notice what you recognize in yourself. Or notice what becomes curious for you. So today I want to talk about 5 of those shifts. 5 moments where everything quietly changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, not like a penny drop, but enough that everything looked different afterwards. And some of these might make it to the book, which might just be an ebook, or actually it might be something entirely different. Who knows? Watch this space. This is me in the process. This is me in the messy middle and following what feels right now. So let's start with shift number 1, because it often surprises people, this one. And for a long time, I thought growth meant adding things on. More services, more offers, more ways of helping people. And honestly, at the time, it felt like the responsible thing to do. It felt like I was being adaptive, like I was meeting demand, and like I was doing what a good business owner should do. In the early stages of Oaha, we actually started really simple. We offered one type of service, and it was management support services. That was it, nothing else. But then clients started asking for event management, so we added that on. And it wasn't just conferences or just one type of event. It was all types of events. We proudly offered a fully integrated end-to-end event management service. And then came the communications work, again, because the demand was there. So we said yes. We said yes to everything. We ended up categorizing our business into 3 service portfolios: management support, event management, and communications. On paper, it looked structured. It looked grown up and it looked expansive. But what actually happened was that the business got heavier. More complexity, more decisions, more context switching. And I've talked about that on the podcast before. And it was more mental load that was sitting with me. Each portfolio still required a part of me. And even when I hired staff into those portfolios, I was still the one holding the responsibility. I couldn't seem to hire the right people to truly take ownership. And now I can see why that was. The business was too spread, too dependent on my knowledge across all the areas. And then this shift happened and the economy changed. A couple of our clients decided to take their services back in-house, and on paper that looked like a real problem. But for me, it became the turning point because it forced the question I'd been avoiding. What if I stopped doing what everyone else wanted me to do and started doing only what I wanted to do? What would happen to the business then? It felt reckless, it felt indulgent. But the belief that changed was that this idea was too risky. The focusing on less things felt more risky. The narrowing down of the business felt like we were closing doors. That saying no somehow limited our growth. And those were just all thoughts in my head, because eventually what I saw was exactly the opposite. Focusing down created freedom. So when you do fewer things really well, you can actually build systems around them, and real systems that don't rely on you as the business owner to be everywhere and do everything. The behavior that followed was very intentional on my part. It was an intentional reduction of what we were known for, of the services that we provided. And over time, I removed the management support services. I stepped away from doing the communications work. Probably that was the first thing I stepped away from, actually. And then I stopped doing all community and sporting events. We narrowed our service in and we specialized in business events, specifically conference management. And that focus changed everything about my business. It meant that we could document how things were done, exactly how things were done. We could create a culture of followed by all, so we all followed the same system. And for the first time, The business didn't wobble when I stepped back. That was the moment that I realized that this narrowing of services didn't shrink the business, it liberated it and it expanded it. So shift 1 is about narrowing services to create freedom in the business and create expansion. All right, shift number 2 is identity shift in leadership. This one was uncomfortable. For years, I did leadership, but I didn't really see myself as a leader. I was good at fixing problems, holding things together, and making sure everyone and everything was okay. And from the outside, that probably looked like leadership. But on the inside, my identity was still very much like, I'm the one who sorts things out. I'm the one who gets shit done. What I would now call the operator in the business. This was a quiet shift. The shift happened very slowly. There was no announcement. There was no title change. There was no moment where I suddenly declared, I'm a leader now, even though it was an intentional decision. The belief that changed was realizing that leadership isn't about being needed, and leadership isn't about looking like everybody else. It's not about being the one person that people come to for every answer. That's not leadership. It's about bringing your team on a journey with you and actually handing over the responsibility to others on the team. Not vaguely, not in theory, but really clearly handing over that responsibility. I had to get really explicit about what people were responsible for, what ownership looked like to me, and just as importantly, what ownership looked like to them, so that we could agree what responsibility or being responsible looked like practically. And I needed to know, could my team work that way? They were so used to me being the fix-it person. Because this wasn't just a change I had to make, I needed my team to be on board with it too. And that's the part that really matters. The team had to be on board. This wasn't about people doing whatever they wanted in the business with their responsibility. We still followed processes. We still worked within a shared understanding or a shared way of doing things. And we grew a really strong culture of followed by all. And followed by all mean that we had a system, we had a process, and everyone followed it. We didn't have any lone rangers who could just go off and do their own thing, create their own processes. We had a very strong culture of followed by all. And that didn't disappear. What changed was that within that shared understanding, there was freedom. Freedom to make decisions, freedom to own the outcomes, and freedom to lead from where they were. And once that clicked, then my behavior changed too. I stopped hovering, I stopped rescuing, and I stopped being the first person to step in. Instead, I created space for others to step up, space for decisions to be shared, and space for capability within the team to grow. And that changed the culture more than any process ever could. This shared understanding of how we all worked together, that was the real shift, because leadership wasn't something I was doing anymore. It was something we were practicing together. And that shift happened over time, but it was very intentional. And I didn't really think of it as leadership, even though I'm talking to you in terms of thinking about it as a shift in my leadership, because in essence, that's exactly what it was. Okay, shift number 3, which is trusting your own judgment. This one is really close to my heart. And for a long time, I looked outward for answers. I looked at other businesses. I looked at other leaders. I looked at other people who looked like they had it all figured out. And honestly, I assumed they knew more than me. But it wasn't that I wasn't acting on my own ideas, because I was. I was building processes. I was building the business how I wanted to, working things out as I went, finding ways of doing things that worked for me, that worked for the team. But it was underneath all of that, there was this quiet belief that I'd created within myself about being good enough. And what I was doing was good enough for now. It was good enough until I worked out how I was meant to do it. So I kept looking outwards. I went to workshops, I went to training seminars, I did all the things that you're told that you should do. And a lot of what I learned, it just didn't fit with my business. It felt awkward. And that's because what I was learning was designed for bigger organizations, in my opinion. It created more layers. It created more distance in the team. It felt cold and it felt disconnected. And when you're running a small business, that just doesn't make sense. Because you know your team. You know their whānau. You know when someone's carrying something that isn't work-related. And of course, there are some not negotiable legal pieces that you have to ensure that you've got covered for your small business. But that process doesn't have to strip out the human element. Doing everything by the book and removing relationships, it never really felt right to me. And so all of these workshops and all of these trainings that I was doing, I was walking away feeling really disheartened. And that's the shift that happened really slowly. And then one day I caught up with one of my former team members. We stayed in contact, and then we were just chatting one day, and she said to me that what she missed most about working at Oaha was the processes, the systems, and the guidance that I gave around those processes and systems. For her, that felt like she knew what she was doing. It felt like she knew where she was going and how to do what was expected of her. And then not long after that, another ex-team member said almost exactly the same thing. And that was the moment that I really knew that what I'd been creating wasn't unfinished or second best or just good enough or something that needed correcting. What I'd been creating was really intentional. I'd been creating the systems and the processes that worked for us. I knew that they weren't necessarily what I should be doing, but they worked. They worked for me and my small team. The belief that changed was this idea that being self-taught meant not being good as you should be, and that somehow there was a better, a more correct way that lived outside of me. And what I know to be true now is that that's a lot of BS. And what I have come to see is that lived experience builds a different kind of knowledge. It builds a knowledge from the practicality of doing what works and not doing something by the book or by a theoretical approach that may have been developed many, many, many years ago in a different generation. So once I took on the new belief that it was the lived experience that builds a fit for purpose business where pattern recognitions turns into processes, where intuition forms the base of good decisions, and that trusting your own judgment is solid, the kind you only earn by being in it, by fully being immersed in the business. The behavior that followed was subtle, but I think really powerful. Instead of asking, what's the right way to do this? I started asking myself, how do I want to do this? And what's feeling right for the business with the people I have in this moment? Because your business is forever changing. Team members change, the economy changes, the environment changes, business changes. So you have to do what feels right for the business with the people you have in the moment. And it was that shift that changed everything for me. Because once I trusted my own judgment, I stopped borrowing confidence from the outside and I started trusting that what I was doing was exactly what I was meant to do inside my business. And that's when I stopped second guessing myself. I realized that when you trust yourself, your confidence grows. That brings us to shift number 4, when the system moved out of my head. Now, this shift is a little different for me because I've always been a systems person. From day one in my business, we had checklists, we had processes, we had templates, and honestly, templates and processes up the wazoo. Like, we weren't short of any of it. If something was done more than once, it had a checklist. If it went to a client, there was a template. So systems were never the issue in our business. What was missing, though, was the documentation on how to use the checklist, how to use the template. And for a long time, that system lived in my head. I would show the team how to do something. I would walk them through the checklist. I would show them how to use the template, when to use the template. I explained the nuance that might come into when and how. And then I would quality check everything before it went out. Every event plan, every piece of communication, every client deliverable, it went past my eyes. And at the time, I thought that was good leadership, good standards, quality control. What I didn't see was that I'd made myself the bottleneck in the business. I believed that I was the one who had to document the process. And because I didn't have enough hours in my day, it just never got done. Because how could someone else document the process when it lived in my head? That was my thinking. And that became a real issue once I wanted to step out of the day-to-day of the business, because I couldn't ask others to take responsibility for quality if the process only existed in my head. There were too many grey areas, too much room for interpretation, too many unspoken expectations. And you all know that your team don't know everything about the way that you like it. Or what I like to say is, everyone knows how Sandra likes it isn't a system. Like, that's not a system to run by, because now you're expecting everyone to be telepathic with you, to know the way that you like it. The shift came when I finally did something differently. I hired someone whose role was to document our systems, not to redesign them, not to overcomplicate them, just to capture what already existed and what we were already doing. I showed her how to do something once by recording a video, or she sat in on a training session with me and one of my team, and then she documented it. She documented the process, and then it became something that was followed by all. And for me, that changed everything, because suddenly quality wasn't dependent on me checking everything. Responsibility could genuinely be shared. There were no excuses because the process was really, really clear. It was documented. There may even be a accompanying video with the process, or there were screenshots of step by step how to do something. So that's when our systems became really liberating for me, not because we had more of them, but because they were visible, they were owned, and that they were shared. And that's what allowed me to take a step back without lowering the standards that I had for the business and the standards that I had promised the clients. So shift number 4, for someone like me who is very systems orientated, just that simple shift of documenting everything meant that now responsibility for quality control could be shared and it could be owned by all of the team and not just me. All right, shift number 5, our last one. And this is a little personal, I would say, because it's about untangling my identity from the business. So this last shift that I'm sharing with you is a little bit different from the last 4. And it's probably one that I'm still working through myself. All of the shifts before this one that I've shared has led to the same outcome. The business could stand without me. And that wasn't accidental. That was very intentional. I knew for a long time that if the business was going to have a future beyond me, it had to be more of a turnkey business. It had to have the responsibility shared amongst the team. And not just so I could have more space in my life, but because if someone else was going to step into my business one day, then they needed to be able to walk in and get the same results for our clients as I was getting in the leadership role. That the business would continue to generate the same outcomes. It would have the same standards. The same culture of followed by all would still exist. The same culture of being responsible and taking ownership would still exist. And all of that could still happen, but without me. And on a practical level, that's exactly what we built. The systems were clear. The processes were documented. The culture was lived, not enforced. The business didn't rely on my presence to function. It didn't rely on a single person's presence to function. But there's a part of this that I didn't really fully appreciate. That if the business no longer revolved around me, then who was I? My identity was so tightly woven into the success of the business, into being the one who knew it all, the one who held it all, and the one that people relied on. Who was I without all of that? And letting go of that wasn't just operational. It's been an extremely personal journey. There was a period where I had to sit with that question. Who was I without the business? And I couldn't rush into that answer. And it really took me some time to understand really what the question was and understand the layers underneath that question. But who am I if the business doesn't need me in the same way anymore? And I don't say that from a place of drama. I say that from a place of honesty. Because when you've poured that much of yourself into something for so many years, untangling your identity takes time. And where I'm at the moment, it takes a long time. It's not something that can happen in a month or even 2 months. I've been sitting with this question for 2 years now and slowly going one layer deeper at a time. I don't think that this is a shift that you completely move on from. I think it's one you revisit at the different stages as you move into who you are without that identity. And maybe that's the point. Building a business that can stand without you is also an invitation to decide who you want to be next. And I'm still having that conversation with myself. I'm still very deeply trying to answer that question, one layer at a time. And it looks different at every layer. And maybe that's why this season of becoming the next version of me feels so familiar and yet feels so new. It's a place that I haven't yet wrapped any language around. But if you've been in this place before, you will know what I mean. When you completely do a 360 on who you were compared to who you were becoming, untangling your identity is a journey. Maybe I will update you about where I'm at with that at a later time. But for now, I'm still in the middle of decoupling, untangling, finding my new identity. So as I bring this episode to a close, there's one thread that keeps running through all of this for me. And that's this thing that growth isn't always about expansion. Sometimes it's about refinement. Sometimes it's about choosing what stays. And just as importantly, it's about what doesn't stay, what needs to be left behind, what you need to move on from. Leadership isn't something that you grow into by accident. It's a conscious shift. It's an identity. It's a shift in responsibility and how willing you are to let go. And systems aren't about control. They're about care. Care for yourself so that you're not carrying everything as the business owner. Systems are about care for your people so they know what good looks like. And systems is about care for what you're building so that it can last beyond you. If any part of this resonated for you, I encourage you to take a moment and notice what's already shifting in you. You don't need to act on it, not yet anyway, but simply notice it. That's often where the change begins. So I encourage you to notice the things that are going on for you. Notice where your identity sits and think about where you want it to be. So I thank you for being here, listening to this episode, and being a listener of Wahine. And I hope this episode inspires you to walk your own path in your own way. Thank you so much for listening to Wahine. If today's kōrero resonated with you, inspired you, or made you stop and think, I'd love for you to follow the show and share it with another wahine in business. You'll find all of the links and details from this episode in the show notes. And if you're enjoying the podcast, I would really love it if you could leave a quick rating or review wherever you're listening to the podcast, because that goes a long way to helping others find this podcast and the stories we're sharing in this space. So until next time, keep building your business your way, grounded in who you are and the legacy you're here to create. The podcast music is Te Kawa Orongo by Naneko Erawata. The episode is edited by LJS Creative Services, and the show notes and blog post are written by Bellbird Writing.